My name's Perry Sumner. I grew up in a little town northeastern North Carolina called Ahoskie, and my mother's side of the family had farmland in Bertie County near Coleraine. So I basically grew up hunting and fishing with my maternal grandfather more than anything else. Yeah, it was that. It was hunting and fishing, being outdoors. That sort of led me down the road to a career that would allow me to spend time out there, at least that I thought would allow that. And then, you know, over time, and an interest in science and that kind of thing sort of helped it out too. I mean, I used to like to disassemble critters and check out how they were put together and that kind of thing. Of course, after graduating high school, went to NC State in the Wildlife Biology program, which was in Ag and Life Sciences when I came through. Only, it wasn't in the forestry. It was starting to move that way by the time I left. So I got my BS there. Actually applied and got accepted to the LSU graduate program, but decided I was looking for jobs at the same time, which is what you kind of have to do sometimes. Had a job offer as a wildlife technician at the co-op unit at Auburn, and decided, well, I've been broke for 4 years. I'm gonna go make some money, and if I can get into graduate school now, I can probably get in a couple of years, because that's how long the project was. Went to Auburn, did a field research project on fur bear census techniques. Ended up taking some graduate classes while I was at Auburn. Applied and got into Mississippi State in the master's program. Actually went to work under Professor Ed Hill, who was at Auburn at the co-op unit when I was working for him there, and he moved to the co-op unit there in Mississippi State. At the time, they were within the Fish and Wildlife Service, so that's where I ended up getting my master's, and actually got a job offer before I finished writing my thesis, which I would not do that again. Well, early on, and I'd mentioned my maternal grandfather. He's the one who I sort of started out hunting and fishing with. But even before I graduated from NC State, I actually worked one summer and a couple months in the winter on a research project that was a follow-up of an earlier project that was done up in Bertie, Gates County, and it entailed live trapping and tagging squirrels, raccoons, and possums, and doing vegetation surveys. And Dr. Randolph Perry, who at the time was at the co-op unit at LSU, who had done this work as a PhD candidate at NC State 9 years earlier. So he really sort of convinced me that, yeah, you need an MS degree, and basically sort of helped mentor me along. And then once I got into it, went to Auburn, and Dr. Ed Hill, who was my major professor in graduate school, he was a huge influence on me. Those two, I'd say, were the biggest one for three. Well, as I was coming up, my first research job, I was able to hire folks, a person, and put them to work out doing research, developing techniques for surveying fur bears. Didn't have to jump a lot of hoops to go do that. It was just something we saw as a need, and we worked on solving the issues or the problems and figuring out techniques that would work so we could apply it to doing surveys. And another project I headed up was a river otter restoration project in the mountains. We didn't have to, other than in my work planning, there was no big approval, didn't have to go through the commission to get permission. We just did it. We ended up purchasing live otters from regular trappers that we sort of trained on how to handle. I could decide whether we'd accept an animal without going through a committee of any sort. We worked with the vet school at NC State, had their first zoo and wildlife medicine resident worked with us on anesthetics and did veterinary work on the otters while we had them. So that was a cooperative thing that came along, and we were able to just capitalize on it without going through a lot of permissions up the line, which is the biggest thing that's changed. By the time I left, you couldn't do anything. I mean, there was no project that didn't have to have approval all the way to the director's office before you could even explore it, and then there would be, everything would be questioned. In the past, most good trained wildlife biologists were trusted enough by the administrators and the commissioners that they knew what they were talking about. And when they suggested we try something, they thought it would be a good idea as well. Just find field work, whatever it might be, and just work hard at it. Even if you've got in your mind what you want to end up doing, your mind might change. And plus, if anytime we'd interview candidates for a position, especially entry level, the thing you want to see on their resume is that they have spent a lot of time working. It doesn't matter so much what they were doing, it's just that they were working. And I think something I've seen change that is sort of disappointing is when I came along. I mean, when you were in graduate school working on your master's project or a PhD project, you just did what work it took, as long as it took to get it done. I mean, I did radio telemetry and coyotes and foxes. I was out there 24 hours at a time, 3 or 4 times a week. And once I started working for the Wildlife Commission, I kind of kept the same work schedule, which was a little bit extreme, but nowadays we find more people that are unwilling to put in over 8 a day or 40 a week. And it's a lot of this field, especially field type work, it just takes more than that. And to me, I never felt like I was working extra hours, because as long as I was outside doing something, it's like one of my supervisors, when we were trapping live otters to move to the mountains down at Cherry Point, he would be, well, we got a break, it's time to break for lunch. I'm like, we don't do lunch while we're trapping. One of the most interesting was one that, unfortunately, working for the agency, we never did get a chance to publish the data, because it's like, once I had enough help to collect a lot of data, and then things would change and those positions would get moved. But and David Sawyer was a technician that was working for me at the time, and on Cherry Point, we did some extensive work looking at scent station surveys for primarily gray foxes there. But I think we were on the verge of, a canine distemper outbreak occurred while we were doing that. So it sort of was an opportunity to monitor what happened there. And we got a lot of good information about survey techniques and the impacts of canine distemper on gray fox populations. And so that was some of the more interesting work that I felt like we accomplished. I mean, the river otter restoration stuff, that was in a way the same. A lot of the techniques we worked out worked really well, but it was very popular too. It was one of those things where actually at the time, and probably still today, it was the only project the Wildlife Commission's ever been involved in that had positive national publicity. And we never tried to get any of that. We never tried to solicit any donations. But when people found out about the project, we got have donations from individuals up in the mountains and some corporate donations as well. So one of the most pressing things that is related to the scent station work, but it's actually not yet been resolved, is in North Carolina, this situation where the red and gray foxes, those species, are really the only two species of wildlife that the Wildlife Resources Commission, the state wildlife agency, does not regulate. It's regulated by legislation. Goes way back to when hound fox hunters had lots of political pull, and obviously still do in some cases, that would, that issue has been out there. There's been a lot of work put into, showing or documenting that those populations sort of come and go. Like the gray foxes, the canine distempers are sort of cyclic. Red foxes, we're getting, and now since I came here from graduate school, which it was ironic to me that I worked on a master's project involved coyotes. And at the time, there were no coyotes in North Carolina. And shortly after I started to work here in 1983, we started to see coyotes pop up in the east, which were brought in by these guys that run foxes and hounds. And so the whole coyote thing, I was a fur bearer biologist while that was happening, and actually watched it as we documented coyotes from 1 to 100 counties in North Carolina over that 18 years. It happened pretty quick, but it made sense because it kind of spread from east to west to east, and both came from north and south all at once. But that whole fox issue has been the one thing that's been frustrating, I think, and it may be like was mentioned today in one of the presentations, is or the panel discussions, is eventually we'll just, or some people will outlive the ones that created that issue. I guess being frustrated with not being able to get projects completed, which was ironic in that the best chance you had of getting a project done and completed was when the commission and the director's office and administrators were focused on something else entirely. It's like when they were all worried about quail stuff, it's when we could do work on river otter restoration or gray fox work. The problem was the quail issue kind of came and took all the technicians away from the fur bearer work while we were getting it done. But it was frustrating in that, your first thought going in is that, well, we can write up a plan, here's what we're going to do, and you can't work that way. You can have and I did. I had a long list of things I wanted to complete. Some were projects, some were big, some were small, but I think I eventually got almost that whole list done. But you kind of had to wait the right time to get it done in the right situation. It wasn't as straightforward as I sort of hoped it would be going in. But if you hang in there long enough, you can outlast some of the problems. I guess the high point was I had started out as a fur bearer technician, and in less than 2 years I went to a district biologist position and actually transferred from the Piedmont to the coast as a district biologist, which was a very interesting job. It was very diverse. I mean, you do all kinds of things, and on the coast you ended up throwing alligators and bears in the mix. But when I got the fur bearer project leader position, I mean, I worked on fur bearer projects before I went to graduate school, and of course my graduate work was on coyotes and foxes. So getting that job and being able to start in on that was probably the highlight. And like I said, I spent 18 years in that position. Started out with 3 technicians working for me and ended up with none. But was still able to get most stuff accomplished. It just took longer. And I don't know, the low point must have been the day I decided that after I'd moved up into the main office at Raleigh, and that, damn, I had enough time to have retired a year ago. And I stayed there a year longer than I absolutely had to, because the day-to-day, it's like when you got all that many, a bunch of 40-some odd people under you, it's just it's a lot to deal with. And then with the lack of leadership we had at that time, which I'm not sure has even changed much, that was very frustrating. But, and in a way I hated to leave, but as soon as I left, I was awful glad I did. It wasn't funny at the time. It was later. I used to fly midwinter waterfowl surveys because we sort of went through all the biologists who could stomach flying in the wintertime. That's like in January when it's real windy, and flying's never bothered me. And at the time, I was flying one of the enforcement pilots in their little Piper or Super Cub, and we were coming in to land at the airport in Newbern. He was dropping altitude, and the engine just cut out. Well, he's sitting there flitting around, looking to see what's what. All it was is that old plane had a petcock from where you needed to turn it to get the fuel to go from one tank or the other, and he hadn't opened it. And so he was able to get it open and get some gas going and get the engine cranked before we hit the ground. But that and the same pilot, we were circling, banking pretty hard over a lake down in Bladen County, and I saw these river otters, which I had never seen river otters when we were doing waterfowl survey. And I made the mistake of saying something to him. And well, he looks at him. Well, when you're a pilot flying a plane, you keep your eye on the horizon. You don't look down, because where you look is where you go. And the water was dead slick, so it was one of those situations where I could tell he got nervous, and I'm usually not nervous flying unless the pilot gets nervous. Oh, which I don't know what's all flying. I guess I flew so many years that in the end, because you look at the Wildlife Society periodicals that list obituaries, and almost all young wildlife biologists die crashing with aircraft. But I had a similar situation, or different situation, flying across Albemarle Sound with a pilot official who was retired Fish and Wildlife Service, was contracted to do some waterfowl flights. And I'd come down to Eaton, or actually met him in Washington, Little Washington, flew to Eaton, picked up the waterfowl biologist. Then I was just getting some schooled up on counting some big flocks of different species of ducks. And we were headed back across the sound, and he started having an engine problem, like I mentioned a while ago. I'm fine flying next to the pilot or behind them, but when they start getting nervous, is when I start getting nervous, and he was getting real nervous. We barely made it to the little airstrip there near Plymouth, and we had to call the biologist to come pick us up, because it turned out that airplane was due for a whole major engine overhaul as soon as he got back. That was the last flight. Well, it wasn't going to make it, and so that was probably the closest call, because it was pretty serious. The good thing was we happened to have enough altitude to make it to the airport. But and lots of nips and bites from alligators and bears and raccoons and otters, and all that, but I don't think I ever really got bit by anything that left a mark anyway.
In terms of wildlife management and the future of it, what do you think, especially for younger professionals, what do you think makes a good wildlife manager?
I think the ability to deal with the general public. You need to be able to deal with the constituencies, which is whether it's non-game bird watchers or whether it's hunters or trappers. But you also need to be able to deal with just the average sort of run-of-the-mill public that doesn't not care about wildlife, but doesn't really have a specific interest either, and to relate somehow to those folks. That's going to be the key, I think, going down the road, because most of the time, if you can do that, if you can relate to those people, you can probably convince them to go along with whatever ideas you have that may or may not even impact them one way or the other, but the support you get from them is real important.
What are your thoughts on the future of the profession?
I fear that it's already changed a lot. The idea that, you become a wildlife biologist and go out and sort of collect data to answer questions and solve problems and find out information about species and their habits and habitats and that kind of thing. It's still some of that there, but there's so much other stuff that bogs you down, and I think that's going to get worse and worse. I mean, I went from, it's just the numbers of emails you get, and I never got hooked up on social media outlets. I mean, emails was it for me, so it just consumes so much time. All these things that were generated in technology to, I guess, under the guise of saving time and making things more efficient, I'm afraid it's created more issues that bog down the processes. But anytime you can get out there and get some of that done, even a little bit of it, it satisfies us. Like I never felt like I always trapped when I was growing up. But when I was working as fur bearer biologist, we always had a project going on where we were trapping something. So I didn't feel I needed to go out and take time off to go trap. Of course, we were trapping gray foxes and putting the collars on them, and then trapping otters to move to the mountains and that kind of thing. So it's, I think anytime you can get away with doing some of that stuff, you need to do it.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like to share in closing? Just any advice or any last comments at all?
I guess just don't let, no matter what happens, don't get too discouraged with things that go awry politically, that they kind of always come back around. Unless you're close to retirement, which gives you a way out, you've probably got time to outlast them. And I feel like I did that a few times during my career, and it always felt satisfying. What I did was, when I started fur bearer biologist, I had this list of things, and by the time I retired, I had pretty much gotten that whole list done. It took a lot longer than I thought it would to start with, but having those goals and sort of sticking with them, and then just taking the opportunities to hit that hard you can when you get a chance. I think the ability to deal with the general public. You need to be able to deal with the constituencies, which is whether it's non-game bird watchers or whether it's hunters or trappers, but you also need to be able to deal with just the average sort of run-of-the-mill public that doesn't not care about wildlife, but doesn't really have a specific interest either, and to relate somehow to those folks. That's going to be the key, I think, going down the road, because most of the time, you know, if you can do that, if you can relate to those people, you can probably convince them to go along with whatever ideas you have that may or may not even impact them one way or the other, but the support you get from them is real important. I fear that well, it's already changed a lot. The idea that, you know, you become a wildlife biologist and go out and sort of collect data to answer questions and solve problems and find out information about species and their habits and habitats and that kind of thing. It's still some of that there, but there's so much other stuff that bogs you down, and I think that's going to get worse and worse. I mean, I went from, you know, it's just the numbers of emails you get, and I never got hooked up on social media out. I mean, emails was it for me, so it just consumes so much time. All these things that were generated in technology to, I guess, under the guise of saving time and making things more efficient, I'm afraid it's created more issues that bog down the processes. But anytime you can get out there and get some of that done, even a little bit of it, it satisfies us. Like I never felt like I always trapped when I was growing up, but when I was working as fur bearer biologist, we always had a project going on where we were trapping something. So I didn't feel I needed to go out and take time off to go trap. Of course, we were trapping gray foxes and put the collars on them, and then trapping otters and move to the mountains and that kind of thing. So it's, I think anytime you can get away with doing some of that stuff, you need to do it. Yeah. I guess just don't let, you know, no matter what happens, don't get too discouraged with things that go awry politically, that they kind of always come back around. Unless you're close to retirement, which gives you a way out, you've probably got time to outlast them. And I felt like I did that a few times during my career, and it always felt satisfying. And you know, what I did was, when I started fur bearer biologist, I had this list of things, and by the time I retired, I had pretty much gotten that whole list done. It took a lot longer than I thought it would to start with, but having those goals and sort of sticking with them, and then just taking the opportunities to hit that hard as you can when you get a chance.